Well, as we head towards closure this morning on News and Views right here on Asala Media, and we ending off taking a look at hunger in South Africa. Now, we've seen a press statement come out with the heading hashtag Hunger South Africa, and this is a press statement that has been released by Climate Justice Charter Movement, COPAC, Cooperative and Policy Alternative Center, and SAFSC, South African Food Sovereignty Campaign. Now, these are concerns that have been expressed. These are concerns that are going through this press statement to the president of the country, to President Cyril Ramaphosa, to Enoch Godongwana, the Minister of Finance, and also to Toko Dizisa, the Minister of Agriculture, and other faith leaders. And the key question here is South Africa at this point in time, a country, did we ever think that we are going to get to a situation where our country, where our people are actually starving? And this is what this press statement is all about. We are joined by researcher and organizer at the Cooperative and Policy Alternative Center, and also an activist with the South African Food Sovereignty Campaign, Charles Simani. Charles, good morning to you and welcome.
Good morning, sir, and thank you for having me on your show.
Yes, wonderful you're able to join us now. Clearly, this press statement cannot spell it out even more clearly as far as South Africa is concerned. The predicament that we find ourselves in, hunger is becoming the order of the day. It is increasing. It is actually getting worse, Charles.
It's actually getting worse, and our children are the most affected, basically. For a country with our GDP, we have an increasingly high number of children who are stunted. Actually, 27% of our children are stunted. Their physiological and neurological development has been damaged for life. The child support grant that the state implemented of 480 is 28% below the food poverty line, and it's 42% below the nutritious average. I mean, the average nutritious diet for a child. And the fact about the child support grant is that in many instances, it does not just support the child, but it supports the entire family. So imagine you have an entire family relying on 480, whereas the average price of a basic nutritious diet is over 4,000. So the fact of the matter is we are destroying the next generation of young people, especially those who are poor, by these shallow initiatives that have been put forward by the state. And the fact of the matter is that people are starving. South Africa is a starving country. I mean, the basic price of a food basket has been increasing by over 2% month to month. It has been going up by over 10% year on year. Where are people supposed to find the money to buy food when it is skyrocketing like this? They simply cannot afford it. And the worst part is, people in rural areas and in urban areas too, they source 70% of their vegetables from street vendors. But unfortunately, municipalities across the country are persecuting street vendors, the very street vendors who are selling food to the marginalized and to the most vulnerable of our people. So basically, it shows that our government is lacking the very basic ethics of caring for its population. I mean, over 15 million people in South Africa are classified as hunger, and the number is going up, unfortunately. And with the skyrocketing cost of living, it's simply exacerbating that crisis.
Well, Charles, you're talking about lacking ethics, and in this press statement, you've used the word inhumane. And this is exactly what it is all about. Human beings should not be treated in the manner that they are being treated. The statistics that you speak about, when you speak about things like the child grant, supporting an entire family, and what are we talking about? We're talking about a child support grant of 480 rand, which in today's
Mm,
terms is absolutely nothing. And just looking at the average cost of a household food basket, that
yeah,
alone should set the alarm bells ringing.
absolutely. And we've been making this call that people are starving. And the current measures that are put in place by the state, they are grossly insufficient. Now, what has happened over the years in South Africa is that we have seen a collapse of small-scale farmers. And the reason we have seen this collapse is because the state has grossly failed to support small-scale farmers. After the El Nino-induced drought, we lost thousands of small-scale farmers who were supporting local communities, who were an alternative to the rigid supermarkets that are purely focused on making a profit. And those small-scale farmers have not been supported. So the consequence now is that we have a deeply globalized food system that is heavily impacted by events elsewhere in the world. I mean, with the war going on in Ukraine, some fertilizers have gone up by 300%. So basically, you're putting many small-scale farmers out of business, and the failure of the state to support them is also, very troubling. And another thing that troubles us is this new agriculture and agro-processing master plan, a technical document that is focusing on food for export rather than focusing on feeding the population here in South Africa. This perpetual, endless profit-making scheme, whereas you should be focusing on developing small-scale farmers, building food sovereignty pathways where people are, is what the state should be doing. But unfortunately, it's not. It's still investing heavily in large industrial farming. It's still pursuing the deep globalization of our food system. And this is the consequence of it, because we have a food system that is completely failing to feed the local population. Now, we have been calling on government to take, because the challenge we have now, we cannot tick box our way out of it. We have to take bold and radical solutions. And one of those bold and radical solutions is the implementation of a universal basic income grant. Now, we consulted with the leading economists. We put forth a financial modeling of a basic income grant that is virtually fiscally neutral. We've put forth that modeling, we've sent it to the government because we need to implement all of these radical measures if we're going to deal with the crisis. We have long called for the state to support local community food systems, but unfortunately, that call has been falling on deaf ears. We have called on the state to support informal traders because people in townships, they source 70% of their vegetables from informal traders. That is where the focus should be. But unfortunately, the focus is still on large scale industrial farms that produce for supermarkets food that the majority of people simply cannot understand. Now, we've also been calling on the state to adopt the People's Food Sovereignty Act that was drafted by communities, by activists, by leading academics, and so on, to say that the current food system that we have is monopolized, the current food system that we have is deeply globalized, and it's failing to feed our local population. So we have to take these measures in order to deal with the crisis. But unfortunately, all these calls have been falling on deaf ears. The state has simply been refusing to listen. And that is where this press statement comes from, to say that people are starving, they are struggling to survive, they are struggling to eat. And as we approach World Food Day on October 16, we are working with many communities who are having their own initiatives because people have to stand up, because where else are they going to find help if the state is not listening?
Well, there are definitely reasons why the state is not listening, and there are clearly agendas that are playing out. And I'm sure, Charles, you can articulate some of these reasons. We're going to go for a break and just think about those reasons while we are taking this ad break. We'll be back.
This is Salam Media. Breaking stereotypes, moving boundaries, joining hands. Salam Media.
So when you want to develop yourself, you need to understand that you are actually developing you. That's what self-development is about. It's about you. So I'm saying to somebody, for example, if I need to develop me, I'm developing me for me first. I think there are so many factors you can think about. The key factors are, what exactly would it be that would motivate you to want to actually develop yourself? The key things I think people should realize is it should not be the power of this world. It should not be status. It should not be money oriented. It should not be fame. It should be just about you.
Professor Mehreen Mia.
Salam Media, humanitarian journalism. Breaking stereotypes, moving boundaries, joining hands. Salam Media. Humanity sets the agenda.
Well, the time is just gone 9:54, and we continue our discussion this morning with Charles Simani, and we are talking about the problem of hunger in South Africa, considering that World Food Day will be on October the 16th, and it is clear that it is occasions like these that remind us of the dire situation as far as hunger is concerned, and the millions of people in our country that are going without food, that are starving, and there are a number of issues that we have discussed until now. Charles, just to continue, and also I was talking about what agenda is actually playing out, because when one looks at the country, when one looks at the land that is available in this country, when one looks at the potential of the land and what comes out of the land to feed an entire nation, and yet, you mentioned that there are other global issues that are playing out in the background. Are we acting in the interest of our people? Are we acting in the interest of the corporates? Are we acting in the interest of industrial farming? Are we acting in the interest of the global players that have got huge influence in our country? And that is the reason why we have our very own people that are starving, and many are dying of starvation too.
Well, definitely we are acting on behalf of those heavily vested interests. We are not working hard on behalf of the people, and that is where the problem lies. When we put corporates, when we put transnational corporations, when we put industrial agriculture in front of people, when we care about those systems of global agribusiness, but leave people behind, that is where the problem is. Because if we wanted to develop an agricultural system that feeds the local population, then we would have dealt with many of the structural and systemic problems that underlie that. And one of those problems, as we have mentioned, is the issue of access to land, the failure to have a progressive and the failure to have an equal redistributive program is one of the consequences that is leading up to this. For example, land is one of the issues that we are seeing a high rise in urban hunger, because unfortunately hunger sometimes is always thought of as something in the rural areas, but the scourge of urban hunger is actually unbelievable. Now, South Africa has historically had food inflation way higher than national inflation, and this is something the state has completely failed to deal with, and it's absolutely disappointing. But the thing is, we have been putting forward solutions. We can pursue a democratized and localized food system if we support small-scale farming, farming through agroecological means. And the moment you farm through agroecological means, you develop a farming system that can deal with the climate crisis. Because our current food system right now is under severe strain due to climate change. It's facing climate shocks, and you find that it's highly monopolized in one particular region. For example, if there is a drought in the maize belt, that means the entire maize chain is disrupted. Food prices are going to skyrocket, and so on and so forth. So when you have a localized food system where you are helping small-scale farmers, where you are developing relations between them and your informal traders, you are able to deal with that. And when your farmers are farming through agroecological means, they are able to deal with the impacts of the climate crisis. But all of these solutions, of course, have not been taken up by the state. But what is inspiring is that several communities across the country have taken up the initiative, and they are pursuing food sovereignty pathways in their local communities, irrespective of the assistance from government. We saw this even during the COVID-19 pandemic, when 50% of households in this country were without food. And the problem is, in South Africa, close to 50% of our households are women-led. So this hunger problem, or this hunger crisis, has a patriarchal dynamic to it, in the sense that women are at the forefront. They are bearing the brunt of the hunger crisis. Now, that is adding to the already existing challenges that are being faced by women in this country, chief among them being the issue of femicide, which also the state has failed to deal with. And like I said at the beginning, it's also destroying our children's lives. I mean, if 27% of children are stunted, if their physiological and neurological development is already hampered, then the question is, what type of people are you going to produce in the next 10 to 15 years if they are already facing physiological and neurological challenges at an early age? That is why we have said this is grossly inhumane, and the state should not put it under the carpet, but should address it as a crisis, because it is a crisis.
Well, apart from sweeping it under the carpet, I think also they need to take major lessons from what has happened during COVID-19, and this is where the press release speaks about, taking lessons, and also when one looks at the riots, the level of desperation in people, and this is the reason why occasions like October the 16th, as you mentioned, has got to be the day of grassroots action to build these alternatives as far as food is concerned, and also at the same time to make absolutely sure the pressure is on all the time and utilizing these opportunities to highlight the huge or the massive problem of hunger and starvation in this country.
Well, absolutely. When you talk about the riots in 2021, most of the time there's talk about the security dynamic and so on and so forth. But the fact of the matter is, those food riots were equal. Those riots were actually food riots. Many of the people who were interviewed, they said it on national television. They did not care about the arrest of the former president and so on and so forth. They were looting because they wanted food. And hunger has always destabilized each and every country. It has brought down governments. And the situation in our country right now is untenable for a lot of people. Urgent action needs to be taken. And if we fail to deal with this with the urgency that it deserves, then the crisis is going to worsen. Because it's linked to multiple other crises. In fact, it's a poly crisis. It's a crisis of where people are struggling to reproduce, or people are struggling to live, basically. And if you do not deal with it, it's going to spill over. It's going to affect each and every aspect of this republic. Now, these are the things we have been saying, and these are the things that we have been calling for. But unfortunately, of course, as you well know, they've been falling on deaf ears. But we've not just stopped on calling, because we've been working with communities. We have developed a food commons map, where we map where people around the country are building their food sovereignty alternatives, where people in the country are feeding themselves. We've been connecting communities. We've been holding dialogues with many different communities on how to address the hunger crisis. We've been having webinars, we've been having series, we've been meeting with communities, working together, ensuring that communities themselves are developing alternatives and that communities themselves are empowered. We've been developing food sovereignty pathways that train communities on how to develop their own food sovereignty paths, how to feed themselves. We've been developing activist tools like water management, how to manage water systems. We've been developing agroecological tools, helping communities on how to farm agroecologically and so on and so forth. We've been holding national dialogues and forums and so on and so forth. Because as communities and as activists, we have to stand up and fill the gap if the state is not listening. And we are building these food sovereignty alternatives. Right now, we have a food garden at Wits University. We have food gardens in other higher institutions across the country, because another issue that is often not talked about is the issue of student hunger. Now, that is an issue that we've been campaigning about for several years, and we've been ensuring that the issue of student hunger is addressed. And now we have a food garden at Wits University, and we are working towards developing food gardens at other institutions, working at Stellenbosch University, working at the University of the Free State, because we have to develop an alternative food network that is delinked from the supermarkets that are driven by profit. If you do not do that, then more and more people are going to suffer, more and more people are going to be hungry, and that's the unfortunate reality that we are facing.
Well, it certainly is an unfortunate reality. Unfortunately, time is also of the essence. I know there is just so much more we can unpack, but hopefully at some point in time we can have a much more detailed discussion on this particular topic. And we normally host this on a Wednesday night where we have a panel discussion. And I think there's a lot more. You've just raised the issue about student hunger, which is another dynamic. Let us not forget that schools. And there are just so many other issues, Charles, which we need
Mhm.
to unpack. And at some point in time, not in the too distant future. We definitely will set up something. But for now, thank you. We do appreciate you taking time out, talking to us. All the best to you.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
Charles Simani joining us this morning. And with that, we've come to the end of this morning's broadcast, the edition of News and Views. I'll be back with you once again tomorrow. But for now, from myself and the team, we wish you well. We wish you a wonderful day ahead, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.